Welcome to episode 6 of April Anger 2025, the yearly amiibo tournament we do where we put them all against each other and see which one comes out on top. Our first match is going to be Jigglypuff against Bowser. Going to be on Smashville for this one. Now, right here we have the heaviest character in the game against the second lightest. So this is definitely an interesting matchup because Jigglypuff dies early, but Jigglypuff has enough air mobility that you can try to carry Bowser whenever he's off stage. It can be a little tough sometimes, though. That is kind of Jigglypuff's character in this game as a nutshell, though. You have to use everything you have in order to make things work. Jigglypuff with an outstanding array of trying to avoid Bowser's actions and successfully landing on him and then getting just hit out of it immediately. All of that work for such little reward. Well, actually getting punished, but the effort was there, and I appreciate the effort. So, Jigglypuff, you get an E for effort. Forward tilt not enough to kill Jigglypuff yet, but Jigglypuff's percentage is starting to get pretty high up there. Also, I think Jigglypuff just used all of her jumps. That's not something I can recommend as a character with multiple jumps, and that once you use and she's going to get forward smash at the ledge. At 0%, that's not enough to die. However, if she was at almost anything more, she might have, and she did take 40 damage for that. It was a fully charged, very heavy-hitting smash attack. So I'm not saying that that's an unreasonable amount of damage, but it is an immense amount of damage, especially for a character who dies as quickly as Jigglypuff does. Literally the balloon Pokemon, not meant to be a defensive powerhouse. Jigglypuff gets Bowser off stage and then lets him recover successfully without any intervention. Jigglypuff got a down air on Bowser's shield, but it's not necessarily safe even when you hit the move. In professional terms, not to say that I'm a professional, but it's usually called negative on hit. Or, at least on this case, negative on shield. Usually if you hit the opponent with Jigglypuff's moves at a percentage above 0, they at least get put into more knockback than you have for the remainder of your move. But many moves are unsafe on shield, especially at such a close range as that one. Jigglypuff falling past the ledge and not able to grab it. And that ends the game. Bowser's going to be moving on. And here we have Charizard against Chrom. Another one of those very alphabetically adjacent matchups. Going to be on Final Destination for this one. Charizard with a great switch into Squirtle, able to avoid out of that combo. And quite honestly, usually near the beginning of the stock is where Squirtle shines the most. He has, well, okay, he has lightweight combos, but he's very hard to hit. And because of his lightweight, you don't want to have him later on when you have a high percentage. And he also has a slightly harder time than the other Pokemon of getting kills at a higher percentage. Squirtle with a side B off the stage, able to recover, not getting spiked to death by Chrom. An amiibo who, if you've seen him perform anytime this year or last year, or pretty much any of the years that he's been in, he tends to get a lot of suicide up B kills. Does not get one there. It's weird to say that that has been so polarizing that that's kind of what his gameplay boils down to. Does he get the accidental suicide kill or not? It hasn't won him a tournament, but it always carries him about halfway through until he finally meets an amiibo who can deal with it. Ivysaur with a Bullet Seed. You don't see that too often, mainly because a lot of people really don't like the move. Personally, I think it's fine. Obviously, with any move, it does have its flaws, but for a move that hits all around you and puts the opponent above you, and you can hit them with multiple seeds, it's really not that bad. Of course, I guess the controller has low battery, so I guess you guys all have to deal with seeing that. Try to switch it out for the next video. For the next fight, I should say. because that's the sort of thing that you really don't want to be seeing this. Although, I will say it's not nearly as bad as it used to be on the Nintendo Wii. Something about how it would measure the batteries. Ooh, great Flare Blitz from Charizard there. Something about how it would measure the battery would be that after about 5 or so years, any game that had the low battery notification, which was usually specialized for each game, it would go off every 5 or 10 minutes because the batteries were so old that the Wii thought your controllers were perpetually almost out of batteries. And I guess you could solve that with installing a fresh pair, but for a while all of the rage was to get the rechargeable Wiimote battery so that you didn't have to keep doing that. And it could have actually been something with one of the sensors in the controller as well. I only obviously had the one Wii to deal with, so I don't have a very large test size. In fact, you could say a test size of 0 is the smallest test size you can possibly get and still call it a testing sample, because anything more would just be purely subjective. Ivysaur able to fall out of Chrom's Blade Dance. Whenever you're using Blade Dance, you always need to consider how many hits of the move you want to go for and how fast. That does determine how well the move's going to connect. Charizard barely not able to grab the ledge. Squirtle with amazing shield pressure. Chrom probably could have jumped out with an up air at some point when Squirtle was usually at the peak of his jump, but in the moment you often don't think as clearly as in retrospect. In fact, they say that hindsight is 20/20 just for that specific reason. On a related note, if you ever want to get better at the game, look at your past matches and see what you did wrong. And Charizard is going to be moving on to the next round. And for our next match, we're going to have Greninja against Link. Does mean we have 2 matches in a row where we have a Pokemon against a Swordsman, but what can you do? Actually, I can't do anything. All the tournament seeds have already been set. It merely depends on which amiibo wins to determine who goes against whom. Oomst? Never knew the perfectly correct grammatical term for the grammatical restrictions for when you can and cannot be using whom. I just know that people will correct you when you use the wrong one all the time. But some people are just like that. Instead of contributing, they just keep telling you when you're wrong. Greninja actually able to get a turnaround grab on Link. That's pretty impressive. Greninja has some pretty... Okay, I'm gonna be honest. He has some pretty terrible out of shield. Kind of the idea of the character is that you never should be stuck in shield in the first place. Which I totally get. And after having tried it myself, it definitely works out better than getting stuck in your shield a lot. Everything comes out so slow. And Greninja has so much stuff he can do that he can afford to have a not great pressure out of shield. But not every character needs that. Although, if you're playing online, I can say that a lot of characters would definitely appreciate it because a lot of players just keep landing on your shield perpetually. Greninja messing up Link's recovery with the Hydro Pump and successfully getting the forward smash to kill. Almost getting killed by that up air. Link has a pretty good up air. What's interesting about Link's up air is that the design of the move is actually from Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Which is not a game most people have played. In fact, I've only played the first part of it. At some point I actually need to just play the whole game. It does have 1 or 2 obstacles in which, if you don't talk to the right person, you have no idea what you're doing. Now that I am much older than when I first started, though, from what I understand, the game gets more doable. It really just does. Anyways, so the up air and Link's down air actually comes from that game, because in all the other Zelda games, they're either 2-dimensional or the 3-dimensional games, you never really encounter any enemies who hang out directly above your head, so you never need a move that attacks enemies specifically in that range. Anything that's airborne is usually rather far away, None of the games just drop a copious amount of anvils above you or anything. So it was actually a pretty good design choice to use those moves. And it gets even more interesting because in Smash Bros. Ultimate there are 3 Link characters, and they all have that move or variations of it, even though it's based off of a game that a lot of people just haven't played. But it's actually nice to see that those games get remembered. I'm surprised Link was able to turn around that fast. Turning around only takes 1 frame in this game, but also if you do it wrong, then you get some other move to come out. And Link was able to land his neutral air and turn around and get a jab. That's a little bit faster than I would think I could reliably do it. Which is also something you need to consider during a match. There are certain tips and techniques that you can do, but if you're not extremely consistent at them, that can often put you in a bad situation. So you do need to measure out. For example, it takes, at least for me, a little bit of practice to get... There's a trick where you stand at a ledge and then you can do a controller input to run off the ledge and then grab the stage immediately. It can ledge trump people, which is nice. Even if ledge trumping isn't as dominant in Smash Ultimate, some characters still do have good ledge trump punishes, I should say. And Shuriken is going to kill Link off the side of the screen. But that is a particular input that if you get it wrong, then you run off the stage and fastball, which is not a great space to be in. Some characters you can struggle to merely survive that. Even if you do survive, if your opponent tries to stop you, you might just end up dying as well. Link tried to get greedy and go for a 3rd arrow, but Greninja was able to shield that. And that's why practice is important, because if you can't do something reliably, it might just lead to your defeat. Of course, for someone like me, I prefer to try practicing those things in actual games, which is not something I'd recommend, but it is something I always like to try to go for. I get a lot of movement mix-ups on my opponent because I fail to get the input I was actually trying to go for. It's not great in the long term, but it is funny every time that I end up in the space I didn't think I was going to be simply because I didn't do the warm-up that day. Link going for a taunt. Greninja tried to hit him with a down air for it, but he missed. So while I normally don't appreciate taunts in the tournament, that one actually kind of worked out pretty well. Mostly in that it showed Greninja, hey, just so you know, I knew you weren't going to hit me. That's obviously not what the amiibo was thinking. The amiibo was thinking, oh, time to taunt, and was lucky enough to not get punished. But that is the sort of thing that if these were real players, might have ended up in someone's highlight reel. Oh, some move traded. I think it was probably Link's neutral air and Greninja's first hit of up smash. Again, they keep trading these moves. Trading is a lot more likely to happen to aerial attacks, simply because they cannot clash, because you need to be grounded for that. And if there's an aerial attack versus a grounded attack, the grounded attacks usually have priority. Now, it's not a strict... Well, I'm not exactly sure what the exact system is myself, but I do know that if someone's trying to land on your smash attack with an aerial move, it's probably got some range to ensure that they don't get hit first. So that's where it starts to get a little dicey as to who's actually going to win that interaction. But if your opponent isn't doing that, and it's just hitting you with an aerial, and you're hitting them with a grounded move, the grounded move should be winning. Link with an impressive tactic of Z dropping a bomb and immediately detonating it in the opponent's face. The obvious problem being that Link was also in his opponent's face, and therefore within the range of the bomb. Greninja getting a little greedy with these water shurikens. Link tries to get Greninja with the back air. I would have actually recommended the down air there, simply because it has a strong hitbox and stays out longer. And if you can hit the beginning, it'll even spike, but that's pretty hard to get. Especially with how fast Link falls, you usually need to start the move earlier to make it back to the ledge. But as you can see, Link made it work out anyway. That brings us to Incineroar against Wool. Traditional dog versus cat matchup. Only other thing I think the viewers would want to know is that and the beginning of Smash Ultimate's amiibo meta, which isn't nearly as documented as the actual tournament results, Incineroar was one of the best amiibo. In the very beginning, he was actually considered to be the best. From what I understand, his side special, the Alolan Whip, is a moving grab, which the amiibo's AI has a little bit of trouble dealing with. That and overall, Incineroar being a character who, if you throw a whole bunch of random moves or projectiles at him, he will counter them with his counter is called Revenge. It basically gives all of his moves a considerable power boost. And his side special actually gets an extra power boost multiplier. So if Incineroar has any revenge, he's probably going to go for that move, because it deals a lot of damage and a lot of knockback and will probably kill. And if it doesn't kill, it at least does a lot of damage. So the amiibos have a hard time of, they can only do what you train them to do. And Wolf actually took the first stock there, getting Incineroar at the ledge with the side special. So Incineroar is a character that if you throw out a whole bunch of random hitboxes against him, you might end up suffering as a result. And the amiibo can't stop doing what you programmed them to do because they're up against a different character. And on top of that, all the amiibo heavyweight characters tend to do better since they can take more hits and their hits are stronger, which also helps they get increased damage output because they don't usually have as many complex or as good combos as a normal player would. Wolf flying all the way to the side of the stage to grab the ledge, and then right before the ledge, side specialing on stage, counteracting the benefit of being on the ledge. Side special in Incineroar's face. The really damaging hitbox of Wolf's side special is at the end of the move. It'll spike, it'll kill. Even if it doesn't spike, it'll usually kill off the side if you're close enough. It's a pretty good move. And it's actually pretty important for Wolf's recovery, because the side special goes a little bit farther than his up special does, angled at the same angle. Of course, his up special can be angled to different angles and is slightly less punishable when grabbing the ledge. Which is also weird to say because the side special does have a hefty hitbox near the ledge when he does it. So it can be punished, but you usually need to have either range or if you have a sort of counter, that'll also work. You can say that about almost any recovery move with a hitbox. Incineroar with the Alolan Whip gets the... There's three inputs. You get it so early it fails, which is like really early in the move. You know what, it makes more sense to go backwards. There's the perfectly timed input. If you get it a little bit before that, there's the early input, which sends the opponent up. And then if you either don't press the button or you get it way off, then you get the no input, and the opponent basically bounces off of your body. Incineroar might be making a comeback. Things were looking pretty grim when Wolf had 2 stocks left, but he's gotten a lot of unresponded damage off of Wolf, who just scooped him up with an up smash in the middle of that sentence. Looks like Wolf is going to be taking this match and staying in the tournament. And here we have Mr. Game & Watch against Joker. Going to be on Battlefield for this one. Joker needs to watch out because Mr. Game & Watch has a lot of juggling moves, especially the fishbowl. In fact, he has the one really good juggling move. And you always need to watch out for those on Battlefield, simply because it gives you 2 layers of platforms you can juggle your opponent through. Joker does have some combos of his own, so he's not left high and dry, but a lot of Joker's combos, from what I've seen, are more reliant on keeping the opponent above you and or on a specific platform. These are the amiibo, of course, so they can do whatever they feel like, and maybe it'll even work. And Game & Watch gets a jab out of shield, and then he taunts. Surprised he's making it this far with such a reckless habit as that. Game & Watch went low to try to get after Joker, and then used his up special too close to the ledge to actually snap onto it. It is one of the drawbacks of Mr. Game & Watch's recovery. It goes a great distance, but if you use it too close to the ledge, it will not snap on. That's why you see a lot of Game & Watches go really low in order to correctly snap onto the ledge. Makes them less punishable, and with how fast the move travels, it can actually be very difficult to punish in the middle of the move as well. You need to have something that travels downwards, which is not actually too common for most characters to have. Of course, anybody who has a summonable projectile can at least summon it and then throw it downwards, or in a downwards fashion. But anybody who doesn't usually doesn't have a general design need for a move that reaches 38 feet below them. The Game & Watch delivery service there, Mr. Game & Watch used his recovery to perfectly position himself right next to Joker to punish him. Joker just lost Arsene. It's important to note because Arsene is one of the most defining aspects of Joker's character. Just every once in a while, all of his moves suddenly start hitting really hard. It is temporary, it builds up with the gauge you can see there. So there are recourses to it, but even if you forget about it, you every once in a while get a random super mode. So it is a very beneficial thing for a character to have. Down smash actually hits Joker below the ledge. I've never seen it hit there before. I guess no other Game & Watch has tried that against me. Which, I don't know if that's limited player experience or if all the Mr. Game & Watches prefer to go for something else instead. Maybe dropping a bomb over the ledge would make sense. Although, now that I think about it, usually Mr. Game & Watch is going off stage trying to hit you with his turtle. The turtle attack. He pulls out it really is just a sea turtle. Multi-hit, very long and disjointed. Very good move. And it'll kill off the side too, so that's probably... Well, I've never seen too many try to ledge trapping instead. Their edge guarding is just so good. Mr. Game & Watch throwing bombs over the ledge. What's interesting about that is that Joker is not over the ledge and probably doesn't have any intention of going there. Joker finally remembered that he has a counter. It's Rebel's Guard. It's one of those non-direct counters where instead of getting hit and you throw out a hitbox, it instead builds up Joker's Rebellion gauge, which is what summons Arsene. Although when you do get Arsene, then it does become a counter. It also becomes a reflector. It picks between one of the two, depending on if you're hit by a projectile or not. Game & Watch is running away from Joker for some reason. Joker is doing his best to try to chase him down, but Game & Watch does not seem to be wanting that face-to-face interaction. But Game & Watch actually didn't get the tech on the top platform before Joker was able to hit him with the back air. That is something to know about any stage with platforms. Sometimes the platforms will mess up your combo. Some characters, obviously, much more than others. Joker not thinking to reflect any of these up airs that Mr. Game & Watch is throwing out. They do count as a projectile. They're not extended hitboxes, although you could say that the definition of a projectile is that it is an extended hitbox away from your person. It actually gets to be a problem when you consider characters like Min Min, who has very disjointed hitboxes that go half the distance of the stage. Really brings up that we never really nailed down the scientific classification of disjoint versus projectile, or what the differences of that should even entail. Of course, in terms of Smash Brothers, it is a non-reflectable hitbox. So I guess that specific occurrence could be the delineating factor. Some sort of trade went off there. That should have been in Joker's favor simply because he's in Arsene mode, so he should be doing more damage. Mr. Game & Watch is the third lightest character in the game, so he doesn't want to be taking any more damage than he has to. Even more so than every other character also does not want to be taking any more damage than they have to. Game Watch goes off stage to Edgeguard Joker. This is with a fishbowl, which I don't recommend, but then he got a smash attack, up smash to be specific, to close out the game. And here we have Palutena against Corrin II. For any new viewers, Corrin II is the 2-player amiibo. It's a little bit harder to tell in the game, simply because you can make these amiibo be whatever coloration you prefer. So in the case of these amiibo, I've tried to make them interesting, at least. Did get to be a problem, though, because when we only had the one Corrin amiibo, I just picked the pink Corrin outfit. And I actually, at the time, never considered that I'd be getting all of the amiibo, simply because back then, the Corrin female amiibo, the 2-player costume, was going for about $300. It's actually kind of funny when Nintendo did a reprint of 2-player Corrin, then the price went way back down to $15. So anybody who was holding on to the Corrin amiibo trying to scalp it, just effectively they lost $275 of unrecognized value. So that kind of goes to show, like, don't scalp. Never know when something will happen that will drastically change the price of something. Now I just need the same thing to happen to the Pyra and Amiibo, the Pyra and Mithra Amiibo, and that'll reset them back to the normal market price so I can get the set. That one was tragic too because they sold out almost immediately. And I guess it makes sense. They are the total anime girl. They're basically from a game that's about collecting anime women, which, first of all, sounds weird. Second of all, it kind of is. But it is a game where everybody's a sword, kind of. I'm not entirely solid on all the details. But if you get them, you get to use them in combat, kind of like Pokemon. But instead of being Pokemon, they're all women. Maybe there's some male ones. You never hear about those if there are. Palutena actually air dodging through Corrin's up special recovery. It's great for Palutena. First of all, Corrin's recovery does damage and it does knockback, so you can actually go for it as a last-ditch effort to try to kill your opponent with. Additionally, it also gave Palutena a lot more stage presence during that interaction. You can kind of think about everything in Smash Bros. Being some sort of trade-off, which is actually kind of how the game was designed, at least from the interviews we have with Masahiro Sakurai, the game's director. But in this specific case, you can trade what presence of the stage you control to try to deal damage to your opponent instead, which is something that you actually give up whenever you go for an edge guard. You leave the stage, your feet get off the ground, which for most characters is almost always a weaker position to be in, and Corrin just landed that up smash to finish off the game. Mid-monologue, too. And here we have Kirby Smash Bros. Against Ivysaur. Going to be on Final Destination for this one. No special character interactions, I guess, to know about. Aside from all the normal interactions of who does what. Although I guess I could mention that Kirby actually gets a different special ability for each of the Pokemon if he swallows them up. Using his Inhale attack, of course. So when you're the Kirby player, you kind of get to pick which Pokemon you want. That is, of course, dictated by when your opponent chooses to go into which Pokemon. Because you can only get the ability of whichever one they currently are. But if they ever switch when you have one of the abilities, then you can kind of ditch it to try to get the new one. But of course, the tragedy of Kirby's copy ability is that there's a very slight chance it gets hit out of him every time you take damage from an attack, although it might be knockback. It probably should be knockback. An damaging attack that does knockback has a chance of knocking your copy ability out of you. So in general, you usually don't have the luxury of having an ability and getting to switch it out for another. You kind of have to just pick them up as you can. Kirby thankfully does have combos into inhaling the opponent to get the ability, which makes it a little bit easier. And of course, Kirby also has an extra multiplier to the damage of any copy ability, he absorbs. It's more of a general multiplier. I'm not entirely sure what it does for every single ability in the game, because there's so many of them. I don't know how you would measure that, and some of those you really do have to look into the code, which is not something I have capabilities of doing. Kirby gets a low spike on Ivysaur as Charizard, getting the second stock. Kirby is effectively a stock ahead right now. Kirby going very high, turns into a rock to get down to the ground, and Squirtle went for a down tilt. When Kirby unstones from his transformation, he does get a little bit of a boost off of the ground. There are still, of course, moves that can hit him in both positions. Kirby using a lot of jumps, going very high. Does not stone this time. And I want to say he predicted the Pokemon switch there. Honestly, he probably didn't, but his move took just long enough to come out that it still hit Ivysaur anyway. Ivysaur, as Charizard, is nailing these forward tilts and that up air hitbox. Kind of bringing things back. Got some percentage behind, but he actually just closed the gap while I was saying that. Kirby gets a spike. Charizard able to make it back. Ivysaur as Charizard, I guess I should say. Not wanting to die the same way again. Flare Blitzing into the stage, that does deal recoil damage. Flare Blitz deals 10% if you hit something. If you don't hit something, it only deals 5%, but that still is extra damage you would probably prefer not to be taking. Kirby almost got hit by a charged smash attack there. And the back hit of up smash is actually able to kill Ivysaur as Squirtle. Well, good job, Kirby Smash Bros. You did it. And for our last match of the video, we're going to be having Mario against Daisy. The Battle of the Mushroom Kingdom. Mario going for a very aggressive forward air. It's a good move to land, but it takes long enough to come out. It can be a little bit difficult here if your opponent is not otherwise inconvenienced, usually by trying to actually get back to the stage, or if you're comboing into it. Which is also interesting because I don't think Mario has technically speaking, a combo into his forward air. But when he lands a whole bunch of up airs, there's this thing he can do where instead of going for another up air, he goes for a forward air, so if you air dodge, you get hit by it. And half the move's a spike, so it can often just end up killing the opponent. Mario goes high. Daisy being a character who, okay, with her float, it gives her pretty much perfect control of when she can engage you in the air. And if you're falling on top of her, that doesn't change anything. And her up air has a very wide range. It's the move that has the rainbow attached. There it is. Just saw it. There's another. It has great space, and it comes out for a move of that size actually pretty quick. Down air past the ledge. It is one thing about Daisy's character is that the down air isn't particularly impressive. It doesn't spike, it kind of sends them up and away. It's a little bit more of a technical move, I guess I'd say, where you can use it to hit people who are below you, and it is good for that. It is a down air, of course. But as a multi-hit that stays out for a long time, you can use it as more of a preventative option instead of trying to hit people when you're landing and whatnot. For example, you can see there Daisy actually used the move and landed on the ground, and that cancels out the rest of the move. So if you hit someone with that, you'd only get about half damage. And especially with the posturing of the move, with how Daisy is basically her character's animation, it also means that the move doesn't have particularly a large disjoint. And I'm not exactly entirely sure what the hitboxes look like, but there's definitely room around it. Now, Daisy that time elected to go for a side special recover. Normally you'd at least see the Daisy player go for a hover in there, simply because a hover is actually a really good attribute for a character to have. In fact, it's so unique they actually added the Tanuki leaf tail item. It's a leaf that gives you a tail, if that makes sense. Which basically gives every character who ever picks up the item the float mechanic. Not entirely sure what it does on Peach and Daisy. It might just give them both floats, or it might cancel well, negate each other out so that they only still have the one. I guess something that would be worth testing after this. Mario gets a couple up airs, and he did get a forward air. I talked about that earlier. That's a callback. Or I guess a preemptive prediction. Daisy hit like one of the weird wonky hitboxes of that forward air. Able to kill Mario for it too. Daisy gets spiked onto the stage. She actually does tech it. That's something to, well, I suppose something to highlight simply because a lot of real-life opponents don't expect that sort of thing to happen. I know most of the time I don't. Simply because most moves in the game don't actually just send you downwards into the stage. It actually does get a little annoying because certain characters can hit multiple down airs in a row that count as a spike, so you could have teched them, but every time it happens you don't think that you're going to need to. Up smash is able to take Daisy's second stock. Final stock, and Mario's only 50% behind. Daisy goes for a regrab, always risky. This regrab you don't get your invincibility for. Mario goes for a combo. Daisy gets out of it with an up air. Not the aerial I expected her to get out of the combo with, but it worked. Jumping up to Mario and hitting him with a back air, that's a much harder move to hit than floating below the platform and using an up air. She's also hit like 4 of those in a row now. So I guess that's shame on Mario. Fool me 4 times in a row. Or have you. Weak hit of back air. Doesn't really combo into anything. Both characters at a high percent. These characters aren't particularly heavy. So any good smash attack probably will kill. Assuming, of course, that it's going the right way. And an up smash, as the prophecy foretold, was able to kill Mario. Daisy's going to be winning this one. That's it for this episode. The next episodes we're going to be moving into the next round of the tournament. Bye.